The Holy Grail. Was it really just an object? Or was it something far greater than an ordinary cup? Something humanity kept filling with meaning for centuries? Today, when people hear the words Holy Grail, they think of secret orders, lost treasures, Templar Knights, hidden codes, ancient maps, and dangerous secrets worth dying for. But when we truly step inside this legend, we do not find a simple magical item waiting to be discovered. We find one of the most powerful ideas in human history. Because for some, the Holy Grail was the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. For others, it was the sacred vessel that held his blood during the crucifixion. And for others, it never physically existed at all. It was a symbol of spiritual awakening, a vessel of divine truth, a sign of purification, chosenness, and closeness to God. And maybe the most fascinating question is this: if one thing has been described in so many different ways, could it ever have been just an object? This is where the power of the Holy Grail begins, because it never gives one single answer. It has no single shape. Every age, every society, every writer, and every belief system redefined it. In one era, it became a sacred relic. In another, it became the object that could legitimize a kingdom. Then suddenly, it turned into the key to some hidden mystical truth. So the story of the Holy Grail is not really the story of an object. It is the story of what people wanted to believe in. It is the story of how they imagined salvation. It is the story of how they tried to make the sacred visible. And the most interesting part is this: in the Bible, there is no fully developed legendary object called the Holy Grail in the way modern culture imagines it today. At the Last Supper, there is a cup, a vessel, a container for wine. Yes, Jesus shares bread and wine with his disciples. And this carries enormous meaning in Christianity, because the bread symbolizes the body, and the wine symbolizes the blood. But that cup is not presented as a magical object, not as a treasure pursued by knights, not as a miraculous relic surrounded by epic adventure. That transformation came later. The simple vessel of a sacred meal slowly became the unreachable object at the center of myth. And that transformation tells us something important. People rarely want faith to remain only an idea. They want to touch it. They want to see it. They want to place it somewhere in the physical world. Because invisible holiness can feel incomplete. Making the sacred visible makes belief feel stronger. The true rise of the Holy Grail begins in medieval Europe, especially through the legends of King Arthur. Here, the Grail is no longer just a religious object. It becomes the final test of knightly virtue. Not everyone can find it. Only the pure of heart, the spiritually worthy, those who can rise above earthly desire, are allowed to come near it. This idea matters deeply, because now the Grail is no longer only a goal. It becomes a mirror that reflects the state of the soul. Who you are, what you believe, how pure or corrupted you have become. All of it determines whether you can approach the Grail. In that sense, the object stops being physical and becomes moral. What you seek may appear to be outside you, but whether you can reach it depends on what is inside you. And that leads us to another question. Was the true search really for the cup itself, or for the possibility of transforming the self? In the Arthurian legends, figures like Sir Galahad stand out. In many versions of the story, Galahad is described as the purest knight, untouched by corruption, spiritually clear, almost beyond ordinary human weakness. He is the one who reaches the Holy Grail. But why? Not because he is the strongest warrior. Not because he is the richest. Not because he is the cleverest. The reason is much deeper. He reaches it because his inner world is the cleanest. This sent a clear message to medieval society. True power is not in the sword. True victory is not in defeating an enemy outside yourself. It is in overcoming the darkness within. So the Grail quest is not truly a physical expedition. It is an inward journey of purification. And when you see it that way, the Grail starts to look less like an object and more like a doorway. A symbolic doorway that lifts a person from an ordinary state into a higher awareness. But why did people become so obsessed with a cup? Why not a crown? Why not a sword? Why not a stone or a sacred book? Because the idea of a vessel is itself deeply symbolic. A vessel receives. It carries. It protects. It contains. It can pour out. It can offer something. It can be imagined like a womb. It can be imagined as a container of wisdom. It can represent the transfer of divine power into the world. That is why the Grail is not simply a material item. It is a sacred version of the idea of carrying something greater than itself. What does it hold? Blood? Wisdom? Spiritual force? Divine grace? Whatever the answer is, the power of the Grail comes from the belief that it contains something invisible but ultimate. The material of the object matters less than the meaning of what it carries. And sometimes, that content is not physical at all. Some scholars believe that the Holy Grail legend was not shaped only by Christian tradition, but also by much older mythological patterns. Because the idea of a sacred vessel, an endless cauldron, a cup of immortality, or a divine container of life and power appears in other cultures too. In Celtic mythology, there are magical cauldrons that never run empty. In some ancient stories, there are vessels that restore life, grant strength, or connect mortals to the divine. That raises an important possibility. Maybe the Holy Grail was not a completely new invention. Maybe it was a very old symbol of humanity, given a new religious and literary form in Christian Europe. And if that is true, then the Grail was never just a Christian relic. It may have been a much older archetype, a sacred container imagined by the human mind long before medieval legend gave it a name. This brings us to an important distinction. Historical truth and symbolic truth are not the same thing. An object may never have existed in the way people imagine it, but its symbolic power can still be greater than physical reality. The Holy Grail may be exactly that kind of thing. Maybe we will never know what cup was actually used. Maybe there was never one single special vessel set apart from all others. But that does not make the Grail meaningless. In fact, it may make it even more powerful. Because its force does not come from certainty. It comes from meaning. Some things become real not in history books, but in the human spirit. And those kinds of truths can outlast stone, gold, or empire. There is also a political side to the Holy Grail. In the Middle Ages, sacred relics were sources of enormous power. If a church, a monastery, or a kingdom claimed to possess a holy object, that claim could bring prestige, influence, pilgrimage, and wealth. It could strengthen authority. It could attract loyalty. This is why so many places claim to possess the true Grail. Different churches, different vessels, different stories. Each one insisting it was the real thing. But which one was true? Maybe none of them. Or maybe each one was the product of a deeper human need. People did not only want to believe. They wanted something visible to place at the center of belief. Because one of the most effective ways to make a city, a temple, or a dynasty seem sacred was to connect it to the greatest mystery of the past. This shows how religion and power can become deeply entangled. Because whoever controls the sacred often gains influence over people. If a king, a monastery, or a knightly order claims a connection to the Grail, it rises above ordinary authority. It begins to appear touched by divine purpose, and that gives it extraordinary power in the eyes of others. In that sense, the Holy Grail was not only something to be searched for, it was also something people wanted to claim, not only as a relic, but as a source of legitimacy. And then there are the Knights Templar. The moment the Holy Grail is mentioned, the modern imagination often brings them into the story. Secret orders, hidden tunnels, sealed chambers, buried maps, lost treasures. But here, we have to separate history from legend. The Templars were real. They were powerful. They built vast financial networks. And they were suddenly and dramatically destroyed. That alone was enough to create mystery around them. People began asking questions. Could an organization that large really vanish without leaving behind secrets? Or had something been hidden? Over time, those questions merged with the legend of the Grail. The result was irresistible. A story in which the Templars were guarding the greatest secret in the world. But much of that idea grew from later fiction, speculation, and modern myth-making. Still, it is easy to understand why it became so popular. People love the feeling that history has a second hidden layer beneath the official one. A locked room, a sealed document, an object never recovered, a truth never revealed. These things feed the imagination. That is one reason the Holy Grail has survived for so long. It feeds on uncertainty. The lack of clear answers does not weaken the legend. It strengthens it. Because the less certainty there is, the more room there is for imagination. If someone one day proved beyond all doubt that a certain object was the true Holy Grail, perhaps the legend would actually lose its magic. But as long as uncertainty remains, the story can keep evolving forever. Every new generation reshapes it according to its own fears, hopes, and fantasies. For one age, it becomes a religious secret. For another, a historical treasure. For someone else, proof of a bloodline. For another, the key to forbidden knowledge. The Grail never remains fixed. It changes shape according to the mind of the one who seeks it. Psychologically, the Holy Grail may represent humanity's longing for unreachable perfection. We all carry some form of Grail within us. A sense of completion, a final answer, endless peace, perfect love, ultimate success. That one thing that always seems just ahead, always close enough to chase, yet somehow still beyond reach. The Grail legend may be telling that exact human story, because the one who seeks the Grail is not only chasing an object, they are chasing the thing they believe will fill the emptiness inside them, the thing that will make them whole. And maybe the painful truth hidden inside the myth is this. Sometimes what we are searching for cannot be found in any object in the world. That is why, in so many Grail stories, the path toward it demands sacrifice, journeys, trials, temptation, failure, loneliness, loss. It is as if the legend is telling us that what is truly sacred can never be easy to reach, because what is easy does not transform us. And transformation is the true meaning of the Grail. The search changes the seeker. Sometimes what matters is not finding it, but what you become while pursuing it. That is what separates the Grail from an ordinary treasure hunt. A man searching for gold wants wealth. A person searching for the Holy Grail may appear to be chasing an object, but deep down, they are searching for truth, for forgiveness, for purification, maybe even for an answer to the silence of God. Now think about this. If the Holy Grail were truly only a physical object, why has it been described in so many different forms? Why is it a cup in one story, a chalice in another, a stone in another, or even a radiant vessel of light in others? Because symbols are alive. They do not remain fixed. They change according to the culture that holds them. They expand according to fear. They deepen according to hope. The Holy Grail is one of those symbols. To treat it as nothing more than an archaeological item may actually be the smallest way to understand it. Because if it were only a cup, it would never have created such a powerful mythic field around itself. What made it great was not the material it was made from, but what humanity kept placing inside it: faith, hunger, sin, hope, the dream of kingship, the longing for eternal life, the desire for divine justice. In some modern interpretations, the Holy Grail is even seen as a symbol of the feminine principle, not merely a vessel that holds sacred blood, but a form representing life, creation, mystery, and what is hidden. The important thing here is not whether every modern theory is historically correct. What matters is that the Grail became flexible enough to carry many layers of meaning. And that is what powerful symbols do. They are never limited to one interpretation. Every age enters them and finds something new. That is why the Holy Grail can be religious, philosophical, esoteric, political, and deeply personal, all at once. Cinema and popular culture made the legend even larger. Adventure films, mystery novels, historical conspiracies, video games, all of them brought the Grail back onto the stage. But here's the fascinating part. Even in modern stories, the Grail is almost never just a cup. It gives immortality, or reveals hidden knowledge, or guards a secret that could change the world, or becomes a force so powerful that it would bring catastrophe if it fell into the wrong hands. In other words, even modern storytelling continues the older tradition without always realizing it. The Grail may appear on screen as an object, but at its core, it remains a center of meaning. No matter how visible it becomes, the true issue is never the metal or the stone. The true issue is what it represents. Maybe that is why the Holy Grail fascinates even people who are not deeply religious. Because this legend speaks to a universal emptiness. Human beings want to feel that life is more than what can be seen. They want to believe that some lost meaning still exists. They want to imagine that somewhere, hidden behind the noise of the world, there is a real center. Something difficult to reach, but absolutely real. The Holy Grail becomes that center. It feels like the final answer hidden behind ordinary life. That is why, when people search for it, they are often moving through themselves as much as through history. One of the most striking elements of the legend is this. Anyone may look at the Grail, but not everyone can truly see it. This idea appears in many mystical traditions. The real secret may stand right in front of you, yet if you are not ready, you will not understand it. For one person, it is just an ordinary cup. For another, it is the vessel of divine truth. That idea is powerful because it tells us that understanding is not only about what is outside us. It also depends on the condition of the one who is looking. The same object can become two completely different universes for two different people. One sees metal, another sees revelation, which means the meaning of the Grail lies in part in the person who beholds it. There is another pattern in many Grail stories. Not everyone who seeks it succeeds. Some lose their way. Some fail because of pride. Some are consumed by desire. Some come close, but are denied at the final moment. The message is almost unmistakable. The sacred cannot be seized by force. It cannot be conquered. It can only be approached through worthiness. This stands against ordinary ideas of power. In the world, many things can be taken. Land can be taken. Crowns can be taken. Money can be taken. Castles can fall. But the Holy Grail cannot be taken. It must accept you. That is why the heroes who seek it are often less like warriors and more like pilgrims. Their journey is not military. It is spiritual. So we return to the central question. Was the Holy Grail only an object? The answer is most likely no. At least not in terms of the role it has played in human history. It may have begun as an object. It may have grown from the idea of an ordinary cup used at the Last Supper. But over time, it became something else entirely. It became a vast symbolic structure that absorbed humanity's thoughts about God, truth, salvation, and the self. The Grail became heavier than metal because it became filled with meaning. And once an object carries enough meaning, it stops being only an object. That is exactly what happened to the Holy Grail. Maybe what makes it so powerful is its incompleteness. We can never fully identify it. We can never fully prove its shape. We can never point to one place and say with certainty, there it is. But that incompleteness does not weaken it. It makes it stronger, because the human mind fills empty spaces. Uncertainty is oxygen for myth, and the Holy Grail has lived on that oxygen for centuries. The fact that it has never truly been found does not reduce its value. It increases it, because something that is found ends up in a museum. It gets a label. It sits behind glass. But something that remains unfound continues living in the imagination. It keeps generating new stories, new meanings, and new quests. And maybe the deepest possibility is this. The Holy Grail was never meant to be found. Maybe it was meant to be sought. Because some symbols are not created to give answers. They are created to send people on a journey. They make you move. They make you question. They make you change. And if that is what the Grail truly is, then no archaeologist is needed to measure its importance. It has already done its work inside human history. It shaped kings. It inspired poets. It transformed knightly legends. It strengthened churches. It fed conspiracy theories. It inspired films. And above all, it touched that missing space inside the human soul. It touched the question that never fully disappears. What if there really is something more? Now imagine removing the Holy Grail from all its symbolism and treating it as nothing more than a physical object. A metal cup. A vessel used in a certain place, at a certain time, by certain people. Immediately, the story shrinks. Then the only questions become, where is it? Who had it? And when was it lost? But when we see the Grail as a symbol, the questions become much larger. Why did people imagine holiness in the form of a vessel? Why did they describe ultimate truth as a journey? Why did they link access to the sacred not with power, but with purity? Why did they imagine divine reality as something that can be approached only by the inwardly transformed? These are the truly fascinating questions. And they suggest that the real power of the Holy Grail comes not from its physical substance, but from its spiritual and cultural echo. Great legends often carry many truths at once. The Holy Grail may be historical, literary, religious, political, psychological, and symbolic. all at the same time. These layers do not cancel each other out. Maybe there really was once a cup. Maybe it was forgotten. And then generation after generation poured its own longing into that forgotten object, until an ordinary vessel became a sacred mirror in the shared memory of humanity. Everyone looked into it and saw what they most deeply wanted to find. A king saw power. A priest saw holiness. A knight saw purification. A writer saw story. A conspiracy believer saw hidden truth. And a person of faith saw the trace of God. So maybe the better question is not, what was the Holy Grail? Maybe the better question is, why did humanity need it so badly? Because sometimes myths tell us less about the outside world and more about the inside of the human mind. When we look at the Holy Grail, we are really looking at humanity's hunger for meaning, its need for visible signs, its longing to make salvation feel touchable. In that sense, the Grail does not only symbolize the sacred, it also reveals human fragility. People want to see. They want certainty. They want proof that they have not been abandoned in a meaningless world. So they cling to a cup, a relic, a fragment, a story. Because sometimes the invisible truth feels easier to carry when it is given a visible shape. And perhaps the greatest secret of the Holy Grail is this. The moment it stopped being merely an object, it became immortal. Because objects can break. They can be stolen. They can be buried. They can disappear. But symbols can live forever. They move from mouth to mouth, from text to text, from faith to art, from art to politics, from politics to cinema. The Holy Grail achieved exactly that. Whether or not it was ever physically real became less important. It turned into something alive inside the human imagination. That is why even today, when we hear the words Holy Grail, we do not think only of a cup. We think of the ultimate goal, the final secret, the most valuable thing, the hidden center of life itself. So in the end, maybe this is the clearest answer. The Holy Grail may once have been an object, but it did not remain one. Over the centuries, it became one of the great symbols created by the meeting point of faith and imagination. It became the shaped form of humanity's longing for God, truth, salvation, and completion. That is why no two people searching for the Grail were ever really searching for exactly the same thing. But all of them were chasing some kind of emptiness, something they wanted to fill. And maybe that is why the Holy Grail can never be fully found. Because it is as deep as the search inside the human soul. And as long as that search continues, the Holy Grail will never truly disappear. Maybe it is not in a museum. Maybe it is not buried beneath a monastery. Maybe it is not hidden in a desert cave. Maybe it is not protected by a secret order. But it still exists. It exists in stories, in belief, in literature, in imagination, in humanity's endless search for something greater. And perhaps the truest answer is this. The Holy Grail was never just an object. It was the vessel of one of humanity's oldest questions. Why do we feel incomplete? And can we ever truly find the missing piece?